Hey!
Hey!
Welcome to
TacoBagel!
Hey!
This is our official launch episode, our pilot, whatever we're calling this. This is the first official episode of TacoBagel, not to be confused with episodes 0 and -1, which you might have seen if you tuned into some of our preview casts.
Yeah, this is the official pilot launch, and we've been kind of hyping it up for a while, so we're really excited to get started and actually officially launch this. Steph and I have been talking about doing something like this for a while, and we have. Yeah, and so we did a couple trial runs. In case you haven't checked it out already, it's on the TacoBagel YouTube page.
Yes.
And one was about why we hate Christmas.
We hate Christmas a lot.
Yes, so much, and why we're a bunch of Grinches. And then the other one
was on accountability and disposability.
Yes.
And like the whole community culture that we've got going around that. If you know a single activist, then you've been connected to that in some way.
Yeah, so we are going to go ahead and introduce ourselves and get started and let people join in and have have a glass of wine with us. Pour yourself.
Oh my gosh, yes, we're really excited. We've got, because we're bougie queer bitches, so we've got to always have wine handy. Otherwise, we're actually in violation of our contracts.
Right.
That we signed when we came out.
We're actually not getting paid for the show, but we are getting paid in wine.
Right, which is the official currency of queerness, wine.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So we all right. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
So I'm Steph. I am the bagel in TacoBagel. I am a femme lesbian, a trans woman, a genderqueer trans woman, an anti-Zionist Jew, a mom, a wife, 50 billion other things. And I have known Michelle since we've known each other a while, haven't we?
Actually, not as long as you might think. People think we've been like BFFs since the beginning of time, but
are we gonna lie to them or are we gonna tell them the truth?
No, I thought we were gonna
born
start off
next to each other.
We actually came from the same womb, and it was like an anomaly because I was a Latina.
And I'm Jewish.
And so nobody, Actually, no, that's not what happened. Steph was a brilliant organizer at U of I, where I used to attend. And I was actually a little bit older, so I graduated before her.
Yes, you did.
And we connected in Chicago after she graduated, and I was doing organizing work here. And then we kind of became like this power couple, activist, organizer duo.
Yes.
And
the super friends, but we can't fly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've just spent a lot of time doing a lot of free emotional labor online for people who may not have been as informed on specific social or political matters. So we decided, why not just make it official,
right, and
make a podcast out of it, so that instead of having to copy and paste the same response that I have to give to every cis white guy,
you just copy paste our video instead.
Yeah, and I can just put it right in there, and the answers will be at your disposal.
And also because we really both love complaining, and we're both really good at complaining,
and
just bitching about stuff in general, and we're both good at politics, and we're both good at talking, and we're both good at being friends. So we figured, why not complain about politics while being friends together on the internet, because it's 2018 and that's en vogue right now.
Yeah.
And people kept telling us, you should talk together in a show online. And we were like, yeah, we should. And then we talked about it for 6 months, because this is what queer people do, is we talk about ideas for 6 months and then they actually maybe happen. We
actually talked about it over wine a lot. So we did the exact same thing we're about to do now, except now we are going to actually incorporate some topics.
Yes, we're talking about the 7 deadly sins of 2017 for our launch episode. There were a lot more than 7 deadly sins of 2017, but we decided to pick. And we've got a pretty good lineup for y'all tonight. Of course, our first deadly sin. Well, last year was sort of the year where everyone cool died. And this year is the year where, without their divine protection, shit has begun hitting the fan in earnest. And with that in mind, and with the bitterness and salt firmly implanted permanently in both of our hearts and all of our various other bodily areas, TacoBagel is going to bring you the 7 deadly sins of 2017, with, of course, the first deadly sin without whom none of the rest of this would have been as horribly possible, Mr. Chupe Fiasco, Donald Trump.
Donald Trump.
Yes. Boo.
Boo.
Don't boo. Vote.
Also,
Women's March.
We, there's a lot to be said about Trump, and a lot of the things that we're going to discuss fall under this, like, idea of, like, the Trumpocalypse and everything that happened since he come into office. But it is no coincidence that we chose today to launch TacoBagel, because this is the 1-year anniversary of Trump's inauguration.
Yeah.
And so what we wanted to do was take into account the year's worth of sort of, like, shit that's happened. And really talk about some of the things that have impacted us politically and personally.
Yes.
And so that's why Trump made one of the deadly sins.
Yes.
And also just be honest about the fact that, capitalism has been in existence since before Trump. And so there are so many other factors aside from just Trump presidency that contribute to a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today.
Right, and the same for white supremacy, the same for transphobia, the same for, like, colonialism, the same for sexual assault, and everything else that we're going to be talking about tonight. But, all these problems they all predated Trump, but they all got much worse under Trump. And so one of the first things, another reason that we picked today, which we realized a few days ago when we were practicing for this, we picked it because it was the anniversary of the Trump inauguration, but we also realized that with the Trump inauguration came that lovely little thing that that white women decided to call the Women's March, because white women love to name things that make them sound important, but they don't actually do anything. And so our first deadly sin of 2017 is the nasty woman / pussy hats / white feminism.
So I think this is a topic that gets a lot of women up in their fucking, like, panties about shit, right? Because logistically, right, the last year's Women's March was one of the largest gathering in recent, like, global human history.
It was, like, the largest protest in contemporary U.S. history.
Yeah, and it was, like, the fall of the Ottoman Empire, then the Women's March, or some shit like that. Like, fucking, it was ridiculous.
Right.
And for a lot of us, I think it was a byproduct of Trump being elected. It was a byproduct of people feeling like they wanted to mobilize and get out there and be a part of something, right? And that was all good and great. But the problem came with the fact that
white people happened.
Well, the problem came with the fact that white suburban moms, right, came out in doves for this thing and never followed up. They never ended up doing anything with this movement. They came out in their fucking transphobic, racist ass pussy hats, and then, like, nothing fucking came of it. And it's like somebody once said, if people showed up, if this amount of people showed up for immigrant rights, if they showed out for police brutality, if they came
for Palestine, for trans people,
if they came out in those numbers for things that would actually have political impact on policies, right? Then we would see so much changing on a legislative level. But for us, I mean, as organizers, this is kind of a fucking slap in the face.
Right. Because, like, here's this one of the biggest political actions, if we can be generous enough to call it a political action, in recent history. And not only does it have, like, no goal, but it also hasn't accomplished anything. It was reprised this year, apparently absent any of the nuanced conversation that happened around last year, because this year there are more pussy hats and more police and more white people named Susan or Becky or Carol or something, just going out and, like, making a mess of themselves in the streets and just harassing people because they want to, show their pussy power or whatever the fuck it is, like we're in 1975 again. But they're going out and they're doing this again, and this time it's about voting, and it's basically just a gigantic Democratic Party recruiting event, but tricking people into going and thinking that they're accomplishing something because they knitted a hat and voted for a Democrat, and then that Democrat got into office and then sat on their ass and wasn't outwardly horrible, but was really sneaky and horrible behind closed doors.
Right.
Because neoliberalism, as we all know, is the best way to save lives.
Yeah.
Number one. Not revolution or anything. Voting for Democrats saves lives.
Which, I think in a lot of ways, the, like, nasty woman movement sort of, like, it really, like, it lowers the bar, right? It's like you've got all these, like, pussy hat feminists that are kind of out here, like, if we had Hillary Clinton, things wouldn't be as bad. And it's like, that completely misses the point. Like, no, Hillary Clinton's also a fucking warmonger and a capitalist. She had a lot to do with, like, what's going on with the Syrian conflict right now. Like, so I feel like there is this like savior complex that comes from like this white, nasty womanhood, like sort of pussy wearing hat, identity, and it's detrimental. It's detrimental to what we could be organizing towards.
Right. And like if you look at the people who are coming out to these marches, they're people who are, pushing back really, really hard against Black women and trans women when we try to ask them to not wear those hats. Like the criticism that we get, or the backlash that we get for leveling even like the slightest criticism against cis women or white women, is astronomical. And you see people like this horrible like AstroTurf thing called the Zionist movement, which
we will talk about later.
Like you get the who's who of horrible people at these women's marches, and then people think that they're accomplishing something.
Yeah, and there are some comments right now coming in. One from Diana saying, "Hey, this is my exact thoughts. Check out the sign that I took to the march. I was going to boycott it." And I think she's involved with a lot of undocumented work as well. And I think it's something to be said that like these women like to come out kind of performatively, show their like signs and like be there for like one day of the year, but then kind of like vanish. And all the other times that we need people coming out for undocumented rights, and we need people coming out for trans folks, and we need all these other, we need the constant support, especially now, especially the shit is happening every fucking day.
Right.
So if you're a self-identifying nasty, I just revealed this. If you're like a self-identifying nasty woman, like,
just please stop.
Please stop and like go actually get involved in something. And
for instance, what we're going to talk about next. Joe Arpaio.
One of the others deadly sins, of 2017 is Joe Arpaio.
The sin specifically is that he didn't die in 2017.
My biggest regret, if any, in this last year is that someone hasn't figured out a way to assassinate this man. Because first of all, he's fucking old as hell and he needs to die anyways. But second of all, in case you don't know who this is basically he's a former sheriff, Arizona sheriff, who basically had this reign of terror where he enacted an unconstitutional profiling, particularly amongst undocumented folks, Black and brown people. He was very much someone that was notorious for abusing his power. Several of his foot soldiers have already testified under oath that he was very explicit about abusing his power and profiling people and putting them away in prisons. He was also known because he was infamously known for creating this outdoor prison in Arizona where there's sweltering heat. And he would he made a point to make this the most miserable fucking place for people to exist in, right? And a lot of people say well, they're criminals, it's
he called it a concentration camp himself.
Right. He literally, he described this place as a concentration camp. And they did things that were public humiliation tactics. They had tours that they would let people go through and watch, incarcerated folks work in the sweltering heat. He made it more pink as a humiliation sort of tactic. So he's just a terrible, fucking horrible person. And he needs to fucking go. He needs to leave. But he was, on the bright side, he was convicted of criminal, basically behaviors, right? He was out here, he basically got caught up in the system that he swore to uphold. He spent all these years talking about the illegality of undocumented folks and then ended up being convicted of a crime. So what ended up happening after that, though, is Trump gave him a pardon.
Oh, this was so funny.
It was so fucking ridiculous. This man got a full pardon from President Trump. And it was a really actually kind of rare pardon because it was so early on in the process. And usually it takes a little bit longer for something like that to happen.
This is the pardon version of a 2-pump chump.
Yeah. And so Trump,
he gets elected, he blows his entire load on this first pardon.
Yes, and Trump came to Joe Arpaio's rescue and basically made it so that this fucking criminal sheriff was pardoned of all his criminal behaviors, right? And so the really hilarious part is, if you actually haven't looked it up, there's a video online, right?
Oh my God.
Of this interviewer saying, like, look, like, how do you expect to run for Senate, which is what he's trying to do right now. He descended from hell to run for Senate for the empty Arizona Senate seat.
Which is a disaster.
Yeah, it's going to be a fucking shit show. So tune in for that. But he basically said, how do you expect to run for Senate and uphold laws that you can't even follow? You're guilty. And Joe Arpaio was like, what are you talking about? I'm not guilty.
So funny.
And so if you look it up, it's hilarious because the interviewer was like, actually, legally, if you accept a pardon, you're admitting guilt. And Joe Arpaio had no fucking clue. He had no clue that he had, like, accepted guilt through this pardon. He just kind of took the handout, not knowing what the fuck it meant. And this man is now trying to run for Senate.
Right.
So
in Arizona.
As if Arizona doesn't have enough problems. This man came back into...
As if Jan Brewer wasn't bad enough. Now Joe Arpaio is back from hell.
And speaking of hell...
Yes. And speaking... One of these things about Joe Arpaio, because, I love to make fun of things because I'm a Jewish lesbian and comedy is sort of like in my heritage, but also because making fun of things makes them less horrible, and that's like how trans people survive. But while you're out protesting Joe Arpaio instead of going to women's marches, one of the best ways to remember that he can be defeated is to keep in mind that he looks exactly like what would happen if the old man from Up joined the KKK.
He's eerily similar to the Up guy. You can Google him. He's not a good looking dude.
Not cute.
And he's all of his track record online, everything he's fucking done, like, it's disastrous. Please go look this man up. Please organize in whatever capacity you can. If you're in Arizona, go out, vote. If you're not in Arizona, reach out to people out there, see how you can support that movement to keep Joe Arpaio out of office.
Mm-hmm. But all right, so that brings us to our next deadly sin of 2017. Speaking of ain't shit old white men, we're going to talk about what has become racist nostalgia for millennials. Bush nostalgia.
Bush nostalgia.
Bush nostalgia.
Let's talk about this for a moment because I feel like we need to unpack this.
A lot. Just a little, yeah.
Yeah, so Bush nostalgia, for those of you who might not be familiar with it.
If you somehow missed Bush nostalgia.
Yes. It's kind of the post-Trump Bush sizing. Yeah, like, we're like, oh man, like, now, like, now that things are so bad, like, I would even take Bush back.
Right.
Kind of dismissing and invalidating the fact that he was responsible for conflict.
He was responsible for the Afghanistan war. He was responsible for the Iraq war because his daddy didn't like Saddam Hussein and his daddy didn't get elected to a second term. And so Bush Jr. decided once he got into office somehow that he would go and take up daddy's agenda. He's sort of responsible for 9/11.
I mean, you don't have to say sort of. He was.
Bush did 9/11. Bush did 9/11.
Bush knocked down the towers. Okay.
Himself, personally.
But it came over.
If you look really closely at the videos, he's at the bottom with a sledgehammer.
Yo. Someone's going to upload this online and be like, oh my God.
Hi, Alex Jones.
Yeah, but the point being is that Bush, was a terrible president.
And Bush nostalgia is a terrible thing.
Yeah, Bush nostalgia is a horrific thing. And it's kind of like one of those, like, things are so bad now, we'll just take whatever scraps are kind of at our disposal, which I think is also really dangerous because this is how we ended up in this mess in the first place, right? So without raising the bar of quality that we're looking for in our world leaders and our politicians, like however that may be, we start kind of just accepting whatever we're given.
Literally whoever is like willing to run for office. Now the bar is like subterranean.
Yes.
And it's because of Bush nostalgia, because we got, as soon as Trump got elected, people were like, oh, well, this is how it's going to be from now on. Remember the good old days when the ex-governor of Texas was president? And we all really hated him then. We were talking about impeachment every day. Oh, remember that guy? Wasn't he the best? Now he's just finger painting himself in a bathtub.
And you know what? They do a lot of. I've seen all these Bush expos. All these little Bush articles about how he's a painter now and how he coped by like painting pictures of like fallen soldiers. Like Bitch, you sent half of these people to war. You sent these people to war, and now you're painting pictures of them? Like, what the fuck?
It's like, this just in old white man feels guilty paints picture.
And it's all forgiven. Everything's fine now, you know?
But, like, you know, this only happens with completely incompetent ex-world leaders, not, you know, your retired professor who decides to go and do the same thing. It's only George Bush who gets this wonderful treatment. And it's Bush nostalgia bad.
Yeah, so just cut that shit out. Nobody wants Bush back.
No.
I don't want Bush back. God forbid there's like another Bush down the line and he tries to run for office. I mean, we already saw what happened to Jeb, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, we all, yeah, we do remember what happened to Jeb. Please clap Bush. We don't need any more bushes. We don't need any more shrubs. A topiary is questionable at this point. Yeah. Save the trees, but no more bushes. No.
I don't need any more Clintons either. I'm just going to go out and say it.
No more Obamas, no more Clintons. No more Democrats.
More presidents.
No more presidents. No more Republicans. No more United States. No more capitalism, all this stuff.
Yeah. Raven J said, also people talk about Obama as if he isn't responsible for war crimes and imperialism as well.
Right.
Absolutely true. Like, we kind of briefed over, like, Obama a little bit, but Obama is, he's
just
a terrorist.
Bad, just not as doofy.
He's a terrorist in undocumented communities, right? He deported more people collectively than George W. Bush, than
Clinton,
than Reagan, than Trump has so far. Like, this man has mass deported people, and like it's kind of swept under the rug because he's like likable and charming and charismatic, and it's like
because he made a Vine.
Hold up, but he sent my abuela back, and like he went on Jimmy Kimmel the next day, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's sick.
Like, fuck Bush nostalgia, but fuck Obama too.
Yeah. Fuck all the presidential nostalgia.
Speaking of things that are bad and we say fuck to, our next deadly sin of 2017 is Zionists and Zionism. Now, Zionists and Zionism are a deadly sin every single year because this shit just doesn't stop, doesn't go away. And there's a lot of bullshit that Zionists have pulled in the last year, but I'm going to focus specifically on two things that recently, like within the last couple weeks, just happened. And that's the U.S. withholding aid to Palestine via cutting their funding to the UN Relief and Works Agency, and the Israeli State's army, the IDF, rounding up and capturing and torturing and detaining 16-year-old activist Ahed Tamimi. So first we're going to talk about the aid, because this is some shit. Like, I'm going to pull up some statistics that I have around here for a second, because I want to make sure I get the numbers right. But so this is some shit. Everybody knows, like, if hopefully if you're watching this live stream, you know that, like, Israel's bad and that Zionism is bad. And
if you don't, there are plenty of resources online.
Yeah, if you don't, now's the time to start Googling. But so no matter what you know, you probably know that the U.S. just under President Obama just signed a new aid package with the Israeli state, agreeing to give $38 billion, around $38 billion in tax money, U.S. tax money, to the Israeli state over the next 10 years. And that was signed like last year or the year before, or something like that. So the U.S. gives aid to the Palestinian Authority as well, but we give about $365 million, or $356 million a year to the Palestinian Authority. So that means for every $1 that the U.S. gives to the Palestinian Authority, which, by the way, like, we can have an entire, like, multi-hour-long conversation about the Palestinian Authority and the stuff that goes on with that. But for every $1 that the U.S. gives in foreign aid to the Palestinian Authority, the U.S. gives $10.64 in aid to the Israeli state. Now, about 38.7% of that money, and this is $3.8 billion per year, so it's $38 billion over a 10-year period. About 38.7% of the $3.8 billion that we give every year is used to subsidize the domestic budget of the Israeli state. So this is military aid, but there's an exception in this rule specifically for the aid deal that the U.S. gives to Israel, where the Israeli state can use that money to directly subsidize their domestic budget, to pay for things that they want to build, to pay their government officials, to subsidize farming businesses, like literally just a direct injection of funds into their federal budget. That comes out to about $1.2 billion in U.S. taxpayer money that just goes to the economy of the Israeli state for no reason. So about 26% of the $3.8 billion that we give every year is used by the Israeli state to purchase weapons and equipment from Israeli manufacturers, not from U.S. manufacturers. And none of this is to say that military aid in any way is good, or that anybody should be purchasing weapons or equipment from anybody, and that it would and this certainly isn't to imply that it would be any better if weapons and aid and equipment and stuff were bought from U.S. companies, yeah. Because they would still be funding apartheid and genocide and ethnic cleansing, and that's all bad. On the face, bad, period, exclamation point, other period, second exclamation point. But it's sort of it's some very unique fuckery that's going on here. That the Israeli state is able to purchase weapons and equipment with the military aid that the U.S. gives from their own suppliers, from suppliers in the Israeli state, which is a thing that no other country that gets aid from the U.S. is allowed to do. And on top of that, Palestinian activists have been increasingly targeted for deportation by the U.S. government because of their Palestinian activism. And there was a beloved Chicago activist and, absolute badass Rasmea Odeh who was deported September of last year. And then there's another activist who's a member of the U.S. Palestinian Community Network who is being targeted for deportation right now. But this is all complete bullshit because the U.S. directly subsidizes Israeli apartheid, directly subsidizes genocide and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people through the Israeli state. And in spite of that, President Trump saw fit to cut aid that goes to Palestinian refugees and their descendants who live in the Middle East, that's given out through the United Nations. And he cut that aid because he said that Palestinians were not grateful or respectful to the United States for that aid. And what the fuck do Palestinians have to be grateful to the U.S. for? Fucking nothing.
Yeah.
It's some bullshit. And so Trump is cutting that aid, but not doing anything to the aid that is going to the Israeli state that's spent for literally everything. But on top of that, because military aid is one of these things that I could just dive into forever because I'm a policy person, there's something else that has been going on for a few weeks now that I really wanted to touch on while we're talking about Zionist fuckery, and that's what's happening to 16-year-old Ahed Tamimi right now. So Ahed Tamimi is a 16-year-old girl who lives in the who is a Palestinian 16-year-old girl who slapped an IDF soldier because this soldier busted onto her family's land, shot her cousin, and was generally a fuckface to her and her family. And so she decides, I'm not going to stand for this. This girl's a complete badass also. She's been fighting the Israeli army since she was 9 years old, resisting the fuck out of, everything that they're doing, truly in the Palestinian spirit. And the IDF barges onto her family's land and shoots her cousin in the head and, harasses her family, as the IDF does. And so Ahed Tamimi slaps a soldier, and it gets recorded and put on the internet. And the next night, at 2 or 3 a.m., the IDF bursts into her home and drags her away, takes her across the Green Line, which is a violation of the Geneva Convention, puts her in a military prison, even though she's a minor, which is a violation of the Geneva Convention, tries her in a military court, which is another violation of the Geneva Convention.
Basically, a series of violations.
Everything that the IDF is doing here is completely illegal, and they're doing this to a 16-year-old girl who had the audacity to stand up to an armed soldier who invaded her family's land and shot her cousin in the head. And so if you don't, I could talk about this for forever, but we do have a time limit.
This girl, actually, if you haven't looked her up, she's amazing.
Google her.
If you want to spell her name out.
Her name is Ahed Tamimi, Ahed Tamimi. So Google Ahed Tamimi. There's a hashtag that's been going around for a few weeks, which is free Ahed Tamimi. Just look into this girl's story. She's completely amazing.
Yeah.
And we really need as much pressure as possible on the IDF and the Israeli state to get her out of jail.
And she's been very intentionally targeted because she's been a very public figure in this fight against the Israeli state, and she and her younger sister have both been kind of since they were very little fighting back against this and putting stuff live on the internet and showing the world how cruel these like soldiers have been to the people in the community. So
like live streaming ethnic cleansing in action.
Yeah, and so definitely look her up. I mean, I think right now there's a limited amount of stuff that people can do on a grassroots level because we're in another country. But like the more coverage this gets, the more pressure there is, the more they'll be willing to have intervention over her unjust imprisonment. Right.
And give money and time and resources to Palestinian organizations however you can, whether those are based in the U.S. or based in Palestine.
And Steph can link down or put some links down for people who want to get involved in that.
But pay attention to this because this is not going to go away anytime soon. But speaking of shit that's going on in other countries, our next deadly sin, the shithole countries comment.
Yeah, and this is a complicated one, right? Because the comment, in case you guys haven't heard it, is one that Trump made about shithole countries and a statement he made referencing Haiti and referencing Africa, just all of Africa.
Generally Africa.
I guess he put the whole continent in there.
Africa, the country.
Yeah, and I think, it's really telling and it's very indicative. And I think a lot of people are not surprised, but also alarmed to hear that like a world leader like Trump would say something so just kind of undermining of Black and brown communities, right? And the thing is, when we talk about shithole countries, there's always this kind of like undertone of like imperialism, right? Because it's normally when we're discussing people who are suffering, it's because they have suffered at the hands of imperialism, or they have suffered because they have been economically privileged by superpowers in the world, right?
Or underprivileged. They've been stolen from.
Right. They've been, So you look at places like Haiti, which I actually was at recently, and there was somebody that I spoke to while I was there, and she was talking about how after the earthquake, there was all this aid that was coming in from all these different parts of the world, and how a majority of that aid, especially the part that came through like the Red Cross, was kind of bureaucratically lost, right? And so the problem is that, like, people are out here and they're, like, tossing their money at whatever organizations and whatever causes they think are going to go out and help these, like, Black and brown countries that are in desperate need of things. And it's like none of that money is ever making it to the people out there. And so now this country is, like, living in this, like, perpetual, like, state of welfare because their government's fucked up and they're pocketing money. And, like, our charity aid crisis, like organizations are fucking up and we're not doing anything productive with the money either. So you're
being kept in perpetual poverty by like the EU and the World Bank.
Yeah. And so it's like you're victim blaming entire countries for like the things that we are directly involved in as an imperialist like state, right? And it's really disheartening. I think it's a really it's indicative of kind of the misunderstanding that people have of why communities suffer the way that they do.
Like classic American bullshit that's going on.
Yeah. And there are countries that people talk about all the time, like Mexico, for example. And Mexico wasn't directly referenced in the shithole country statement, but people talk about how bad it is and how the cartels are in Mexico and like.
Guess whose fault that is?
Yeah, and everyone in Mexico knows that the U.S. is very much directly involved in the drug cartel situation, and there is no secret about it in our communities. So
and you hear this all the time with countries that people who live in the U.S. or who live in the West more broadly think are like shithole countries. Most of the time they're Black or brown majority countries. Most of the time they're Muslim countries. And all the time, there are countries with direct histories of either colonial or imperial interference. The same as the countries targeted by the quote-unquote Muslim ban. That wasn't all Muslim countries. It was Muslim countries that had a recent history of U.S. imperial intervention and bullshit meddling. And so when the Tangerine Terror starts throwing around things like shithole countries and saying stuff like shithole countries, what's really going on is he's, bashing on people for being colonized.
Yeah.
And, yikes.
Yeah.
Fucking yikes.
And there's not, there's not really a lot you can say to that other than the fact that it's sinful. It's sinful that it's like just misplaced blame, and it's really just like an
goddamn bad.
Yeah, it's a terrible thing, and it's like just like it's embarrassing that like a world leader would like go out on a limb to say something like, or a world leader.
Mm-hmm.
So you can put that in big quotes. So
this is sort of the thing that everybody's been waiting for us to talk about.
Yeah. And this is the big thing. We put out a poll on our TacoBagel page, which you can check out if you're not already a fan of it. But we put out a poll where we're like, hey guys, who would you like us to drag more, Donald Trump or Aziz Ansari? And
guess who won?
Aziz definitely won by a landslide.
Which I think is the last thing Aziz Ansari is going to be winning in a little bit. Is our poll for getting dragged.
So the last deadly sin
is
the Me Too
camp. And it's not necessarily Me Too itself. It's all the stuff that led to Me Too.
Right.
Directly coming down from when Chief Awful Guy Hugh Hefner died and his protective shield of gross slime was washed away from all men.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, shit started to come out because Hefner was gone, and it's like it was magic. That all these fucking rapist-ass men started getting outed one after the other after the other.
So the real sin is actually sexual assault.
Yes.
And just like a general trigger warning, we are going to be talking a lot about like sexual assault in the next short segment. And kind of what that means and what sexual coercion and manipulation is and the kind of impact it has and the power and agency that people hold in those situations. So, yeah, I think, in general,
where to fucking start?
There's so much to talk about when you're discussing sexual assault, right? And the big thing that I'm seeing, right, especially after the Me Too movement, all these women coming out talking about these horrific experiences, and particularly one person, Harvey Weinstein, kind of like became the spotlight for predator perpetrators. People who are just like need to be held accountable. And he got dragged through the mud, and he did
very quickly.
Yeah,
very quickly. People just started dragging him, although not actually all that quickly, because apparently people knew about this for decades, and were just content to sit on their asses with their mouth closed and their thumbs up their ass while they were sitting on their asses, because that's just how little they wanted to do, and just let it happen.
But the good news is eventually, right? This got big enough, and this became enough of a problem, right? Good news, bad news is that like. He actually resigned, and then people started holding him accountable, and then hopefully there was some legal follow-up. So there was just a lot of discussion that took place around sexual assault, and people were mostly supportive of this movement.
And then Kevin Spacey happened.
Then Kevin Spacey happened.
Oh, God, did Kevin Spacey happen?
So people were like, all right, they're like, Kevin Spacey thing, that sounds a little, like, that's suspect.
Right.
But also still sexual assault is bad, and he probably shouldn't have been trying to make a move on a 14-year-old boy, right? So there was
or,
still,
like, coming out as gay as an excuse.
Right, or, yeah, that was terrible.
Ooh.
Oh, my God.
The bad look of all bad looks.
Oh, my gosh, yeah, every queer person in the world just fucking, like, did a collective, like,
we actually had a committee meeting collectively, and we excommunicated Kevin Spacey from gayness.
Yeah.
So he might self-identify, but Kevin Spacey's straight.
Yeah, his behaviors were
none of us want him.
Yeah, it's fine. He can go stay wherever he wants. But
and that's not to absolve gay men of all the bullshit that they do. We see you, we're on to you. We still know about all your bullshit too. But Kevin Spacey is a particular case. Like, no, he's excommunicated.
Yeah.
And if the rest of y'all fuck up on that scale too, you're out too.
I mean, everyone can fuck up. Right. Any man can fuck up, and they can get the.
And by that scale, we mean any scale at all. We're on to you, men.
But yeah, the big thing, right, and the big conversation that is happening right now, is the Aziz Ansari one, and this is why I'm so tired of this conversation at this point. I'm so fucking tired of it. Because I have for the first time realized what a collective piece of shit people are. And I will say this. So, Aziz Ansari took this girl on a date, right? According to this first-hand account by this girl. Took this girl on a date, kind of rushed her out through their date over dinner, and then invited her back to his place. She had a genuine interest in him, so she went back to his place.
Like beloved celebrity, actual crush.
Yeah.
And things seemed to be on the up and up.
Yeah.
At first.
And she went back to his place, and from then, things sort of just, like, devolved, right? And he was very aggressive. he kept trying to like have sex with her, and he like put her up on his like countertop, on his kitchen countertop, and she was just sort of like, all right, this is not really what I want right now. Like, can we slow down?
Right.
And I think explicitly her words were like, I don't want to have sex because I don't want to hate you.
Right.
And
she said no in basically every single way that you can say no without specifically looking him in the face and saying no.
Right. Without like literally holding his hand and being like, for the love of God, like you need to stop. And so this man, like, he acknowledged it. He said, Aziz acknowledged, and he was like, all right. He's like, I don't want you to do anything you don't want to do. It's not fun unless we're both having fun, and let's just move over to the couch, right? So this woman was like, oh, great. Like, he got the message loud and clear.
And yet,
when they moved over to the couch, he proceeded with the same invasive behaviors, right? And so the problem that I'm seeing right now is that people are defending this.
Mm-hmm. Everybody's showing their entire ass on this situation right now. Like, it's nobody, like, none of the men, and, like, some women, too, that I've been seeing weighing in on, like, this is not a good look for people to defend this man. Like,
I'm here to hold every single woman who's ever fucking defended this shit, like, accountable, because your shit is disgusting. I am more disappointed collectively in women, because every single woman I've heard say this has been like, well, that's happened to me before. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And that's the fucking problem, right?
Right.
Is that we sit here and we appease to men's coercion and manipulation and their pressure until it gets to a point where we feel like it's violating us, right? But this is such a normal thing that we've made it. We normalized it in our minds. And it's fucked up. And the other thing I'm seeing is survivors coming out and saying like, well, I was sexually assaulted in this way, X, Y, and Z way, and this is very different from that. It's like, how dare you invalidate someone else's experience in that way?
Gatekeeping sexual assault is one of the grossest things that anybody can do. Like, you know, yes, it is independently horrible that any survivor has to be a survivor of sexual violence.
Yeah.
But it is probably the shittiest thing that anybody can do to take your own experience and weaponize it against somebody else and try to invalidate their experience.
Yeah, and
just because it wasn't, you know, up to your standards of severity for violence or coercion or whatever the fuck else.
Yeah, and I think that the other complicated thing here is that what happened was not legally considered sexual assault, right?
Right.
And we had a conversation about this previously, about how disgusting it is that when people bring this up, they're like, well, is it sexual assault? Is it legally sexual assault?
According to the law.
Is it, you know, is this actually considered legally sexual assault? And it's like, should the hallmark of our ethical, like, morality, of our sexual morality be like predicated in legality?
Right, like our racist, like, capitalist, like, horrible as fuck legal system? Like, no. No, that should not be a standard for anything that we base, like, our ethical code as, like, society, and especially people who are calling themselves part of, like, the left or whatever the fuck you want to call yourself. Like, if you consider yourself to be an ethical person, you shouldn't base your standard of sexual violence on whether or not it can be tried as rape in a court of law.
Right.
That's no standard. That's a legal standard may as well not be any standard at all, because it's completely, like, it's the foundation of that system is inherently flawed.
And the other thing, too, is that, you know, the thing that I keep hearing, especially from men, is, like, men are not mind readers. And one, nobody asked you to be fucking mind readers. One, literally this woman had the courtesy to give him so many different ways of to show her discomfort, right? She physically was trying to move away from him. She was, like, verbally expressing that she didn't want to hate him. And this is a man who you were saying is an actor.
Right,
He's paid to read emotion.
Like, Aziz Ansari is an actor and a comedian. He has professional training. He has more training than 99.9% of fucking people in the world on how to recognize social and physical cues. He should not have to be told directly to his face, no, fuck off, for him to get that this woman was uncomfortable.
And sex in itself is, like, innately so nonverbal in a lot of ways, right? Like, we feed off of what people say and do, and, like, it's so reductionist to imagine that, like, every encounter is just, like, a yes or no, clear cut. But you still want to confirm, right? You still want that consent. You still need to be constantly asking your partner if this is okay, right? Because somebody, and I think somebody posted this online, and it was a guy, and he was like, hey, did she let you have sex with her, or did she want you to have sex with her, right? And that is the distinction. That is the difference between, like, an enthusiastic, consentful, dynamic sexual interaction with someone and
or
just
coercion
like,
and violence.
Yeah. And
like one of the big takeaways from this is, like, you know, there's been so many men who have been coming out and saying, well, I look at people all the time. Well, you know what? Guess what, bro? You know, you're trash too. You know, if this is your, you know, if this is your standard sexual MO, you maybe should not be having sex.
Yeah, you like, probably should not be having sex at all if you're having trouble with, like, ideas of consent.
This
and
whole, like, soft boy routine, this whole, like, you know, haha, I'm a man, I'm terrible, let's have sex, like, bullshit has to stop. And there's, you know, there's no good men in this situation. It's bad.
And here's what I'll say in defense of the, like, it just being like a man issue. It's not. I think women also, it's not like we're ripped out of the, like somebody said, no one's fucking ripped out of the womb. Someone on my Facebook said that. I think it was Ashley Ray. I want to give her credit. She said no one's fucking ripped out of the womb just knowing about consent. And I think that's really important. It's like we learn about this through, like, our experiences and through things that make us feel uncomfortable and through things that, like, people have to tell us are, like, boundaries. And so it's not like men and women just, like, we're here and we know. It's like we have to be open and communicative about it, and we have to learn about these things. At the same time, there is a level of agency that men in particular, and especially a man like Aziz, who is a celebrity and someone of power, and
made his entire career off of making fun of the exact thing that he did.
Yeah, and it's, you know, he has power and agency in that scenario, and it's important for anyone who holds agency in any scenario to really understand that and make sure they're not exploiting that.
Right. And it's, you know, there's one, like, I think the last thing to be said on that is, at this point, especially, like, if you are a person existing in today's society and you have not received any level of education around consent and you have any presence on the internet whatsoever, willful ignorance might be playing a factor. Like, there is no excuse today in 2018 to be a human out in the world having sex or romantic relationships of any kind or sexual relationships of any kind and not having even the most basic of education about consent.
Yeah. And, you know,
no excuse.
The thing is, and we'll kind of wrap this up because I feel like we've touched on a lot of different points, but one of the big things I had mentioned before is that at the root of this isn't just about Aziz, right?
Right.
This isn't just about this one scenario. This is about the commonplace. It's about, I mean, it's about toxic masculinity. It's about power. It's about sex.
It's about rape culture.
It's about rape culture. It's about the way that we normalize these very, like, violent and invasive behaviors. And we kind of, like, try to conceptualize assault as, like, this very graphically violent thing, and it's not always going to play out that way, right?
Life is not Law and Order SVU.
Right, because the majority of the people who violate those boundaries are, like, nice guys or people in the community.
People known to the survivor.
Right, or people who, and statistically, people get sexually assaulted by people who are they close to, family members, partners, intimate partners, you know. So it's not black and white. The way that these things enact and play out are often really diluted and gray. And what we can do to our best of our ability is say, like, hey, like, let's hold ourselves accountable for this shit. Let's hold other people accountable so that next time Aziz goes on a date, he'll think twice about
if Aziz ever goes on a date again in his life.
If he ever has another date, if this man is ever fortunate enough that any woman gives him another opportunity, you know, like, he'll know that those are not things that are acceptable behavior.
Should do.
Yeah. And so let's keep making this accountability a thing of 2018. Let's make it, like, the year of accountability.
Let's leave this bullshit in 2017, people. And, and which is also, like, you know, it's a little bit of our bonus deadly sin is cis men, because our first sin was Trump, but our bonus sin is cis men, because everything that we talked about has been brought to you by cis men. Cis men, they're the worst. But yes, this has been our first episode of Taco Bagel, y'all. Thank you so much for tuning in and sharing part of your night with us.
Yes.
yeah, we're really psyched to be finally doing this.
Yeah, and we're gonna be scheduling a little bit of a break before we start doing our bi-weekly follow-up, but we come back on February 10th.
February 10th.
February 10th.
Yes.
And Stephanie and I will be scheduling a follow-up on our page and promoting for that as well. So if you liked what you saw, great. We also have a YouTube page up where we'll be uploading the videos soon.
If you search Taco Bagel on YouTube, we are the first thing that comes up. Our channel is called TacoBagel Podcast.
And there's a logo of a taco bagel.
Yeah, there's our Taco Bagel logo. It's on all of our videos. If you want to check out our YouTube.
And that's just designed. Special shout out to Vicky Ortiz for making the Taco Bagel logo.
Yes. Big props, big ups.
Yeah, so definitely check out her work as well.
Leave a like on our Facebook page. Yes. Share this video.
Comment on the video if you fucking hate it, if you disagree, if you love it, whatever it is.
Dom over there roasting our outfits, asking us why we're both matching the couch. Rude.
Oh, wow.
Rude.
Wow.
Okay. All right.
This is why cis men are the worst. This is just full circle.
This is we're gonna upload this onto YouTube shortly afterwards, later tonight. This is gonna go on YouTube. If you couldn't watch all of this, or if you have friends who wanted to tune into Taco Bagel, but were for some reason doing something else because they have a life, and had plans at 6 on a Saturday, how fucking dare they? This is gonna be on YouTube. Check out our YouTube channel. Like, comment, subscribe. I'm Michelle. And I'm Steph.
And we will be seeing you soon again.
This has been Taco Bagel. Bye, y'all.